First light for my observatory on episode 382 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for everybody who likes going out under the stars. So, Shane, you are on the ball as usual. We have a small correction to make about when we're going to announce the Patreon calendar winners. What's going on?
Yeah, so in a couple of episodes, I think we said that we would announce it on December the 11th. Well, we're changing that just slightly. It'll be December 14th. So that episode will announce, who won the calendars. And as a reminder, it's basically any of our Patreon supporters have an opportunity to win a 2024 RASC Observers Calendar. We'll just randomly pick a few names and announce it on that show.
Yeah, and the reason is that we are going to, for the first time in the around 4 years we've been doing the podcast, we're going to take the Christmas holidays off-ish, I think is the plan.
Yeah, I think you're traveling and won't be available, which is great. Well, not great, but, it's fine.
Shane gets a break from me. There, you've heard it here.
Yes. But anyway, so we're just trying to do a couple extra recordings during our normal recording sessions, which allows us to churn out episodes, but also not have to record during our normal cadence over the holiday season. Yeah,
we appreciate everybody for listening. And I think we decided this at one point in time that, we would try to do after the pandemic holidays and weekends and, start introducing a few breaks, just to let listeners know now ahead of time that, and if you're really hard up for some actual astronomy listening, you can go back and listen to one of the nearly 400 episodes that we will have recorded.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot there.
So I'll talk about my observatory in a sec, but, read a listener email first, because for me, Shane, anyway, I'm not sure how much of an impact doing this podcast has had on you, but for me, it's really helped me get focused on my own astronomy. And as part of that, I end up getting an old cabin, a nice piece of land, put an observatory on, and then eventually we've built an observatory there, and now able to start doing some astronomy there, and still quite a few more tweaks to go. But I think by the spring we should be pretty much 100% up and running, maybe by mid-June. Probably a little bit of cement work needs to be done still, but it's in a usable state as is, I think. So pretty exciting.
Yeah, this was a project that had started a little while ago, and I know you've had some ups and downs, and in terms of when you thought it might be done, and some challenges along the way. But it's great to see that it's operational and that you were able to look at some stars last night.
Yeah, but just to get going, though, I think we will read a listener email. Do you want me to start? And then...
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just start reading. The person who wrote in was Liam, and he goes on to say, "Dear Chris and Shane, I've been enjoying your podcast for a couple years. Many thanks." Well, thank you for listening, and thank you for writing in. We really do appreciate it. Liam goes on to say, "I am a member of a local astronomical society, but I meet up with them only about once a month or so. However, listening to your podcast and the folks who write in gives me twice a week during my drive to work a sense of fellowship in the hobby of visual astronomy, and I always welcome that. I enjoy hearing the observing notes and have for a long time wanted to write up and share some of mine. So here goes. Thursday, November 30th. I have several telescopes that I was using. These include 50, 60, 70, 80, and 120 millimeter refractors ranging from f5 through f7 and a 90 millimeter Max-Sutov, and Liam enjoys using them all. On this evening, I decided to use my first telescope, a 8-inch f6 Newtonian on a Dobsonian base, which my wife had gifted me at the beginning of COVID. I used a Telrad and then a Stellarvue 10 by 60 finder to get me to where I want to observe. Then I use the eyepiece. The finder has a illuminated reticle, and that was a real game changer for my observing. The telescope has a 2-inch focuser But on this evening, I used a 1.25 inch adapter and observing from my backyard, which he lives in Virginia. So that would be nice. I imagine at this time of year, probably not -12.
Yep.
So he goes on to say that he has a small area that's shaded from all the street lights that surround his home, and he can go out and sort of be semi-dark adapted. And he also sometimes will go and drive 30 minutes to a local dark sky site, where he goes on to say, I typically observe with observers, which is certainly a lot of fun, but I often like the experience of observing on my own. It's a great way to wind down and relax. I use Sky Safari to plan out and record my observing sessions. I always use an observing chair. This is critical to me actually spending some time at the eyepiece and looking carefully without any hurry at what I'm looking at. My view of the sky from my backyard is limited by my house and surrounding trees, but I do have a couple of windows of open sky. Recently, I've had a clear view of Cassiopeia and have spent a lot of time observing what it has to show. On this evening, I spent some time on open clusters, including NGC 663, which strangely enough, I was reading about last night when I woke up in the middle of the night, and also NGC 457, which is the ET Owl or Skydiver cluster. I switched to my bino viewer and viewed it at 75 magnification, making it almost fill the whole field of view. Inspired by your podcast, I got an Arcturus bino viewer and love using it to look at open and globular star clusters. It's very reasonably priced and works very well. NGC 457 looked amazing in its stereoscopic view. From there, I moved to the double cluster, still using the bino viewer, moving between the two clusters, and then along the string of stars to star 2, aka the Muscle Man cluster. All right, Shane, do you want to hop in by this time?
Yeah. So by this time, Auriga was in my window of viewing. So I moved over onto that constellation and observed some clusters, then including the Pinwheel cluster. At first, I found moving a Newtonian telescope to be very tricky, given that its view is upside down and switched side to side. But by now, I have used it enough to move it almost intuitively. Unlike my smaller telescope, I tend to use my whole upper body to move the Newtonian, using one handle at the top, one at the base, and sometimes also either my knee or shoulder to move the telescope's OTA. Finally, I turn the telescope up towards Jupiter. I always enjoy seeing the ways that its moons happen to be arranged, and this night was no exception. I switched out the bino viewer and experimented with different single eyepieces, a 32 millimeter, a 16, and then settling on a 10 millimeter Baader Classic Ortho, which framed the view nicely at 120 times. The planet's bands were coming in and out of focus with the shifting atmosphere. I tried a couple of different filters to slightly darken the view and make the bands stand out more. I tried out Baader's contrast booster, but wanted something stronger. So I tried out a variable polarizing filter and found just the right level to bring out the bands clearly to me. By this point, I realized it had gotten late and that I had a lot of eyepieces, etc., to put away. So I called it a night. It was a fun evening, and I spent some relaxed time looking carefully and without any hurry at a handful of objects. I also enjoyed experimenting with different eyepieces and the ongoing experience of learning new things about my telescope every time I use them. Visual astronomy certainly requires skill and regular practice. Thanks again for the podcast and for all of the information and inspiration that you offer. Best wishes, Liam.
Thanks so much, Liam. That was really nice.
Yeah, great email. And just walking, have him walking us through that observing session. I kind of felt that same level of, pleasure just hearing it, just enjoying the night sky and just having some fun with the equipment and getting different views and experimenting with different combinations. I thought that was awesome.
I saw a lot of you in that observing, Shane, with the bino viewer and the eyepiece selection, and I thought you would enjoy that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. And I felt a little bad. I was a little bit slow, kind of getting back to Liam. I did write him a very short reply and asked kindly if we could read his email in the show because I was trying to get my observatory up and running, sort of finally. Few little things going on there, Shane, to get it up and running. I sent you a couple photos. Not sure if you had a chance to take a look at those.
Yeah. I did take a look. Looks sharp.
Yeah, put the scopes in, yesterday afternoon. I should have waited for my builder said he would come up and help. Like he's such a great person. He really is. He's just awesome. But I always feel like I'm bugging him all the time, even though like I know these things really don't bug him at all. He's like happy to come and help and do whatever. But I just was eager, and he had some other errand to run. He had come up and was working on something and then had to take off. And I'll come up in an hour, he said, and help you out. And I was like, I'm not waiting. I'm putting telescopes in this observatory. But I was putting one in, and I was telling you, I did drop it, but I didn't like drop it. And I kind of crushed my hand a bit between the rail and the mount, and kind of scraped my hand up a little bit. Wasn't a big deal with a 6-pound telescope, but if it was like a really big refractor or something, might have caused some damage. But anyway, got those scopes in, and I'm still staying out here at the cabin. It's getting pretty chilly, and I did freeze up a line last night, so I'll have to try to sort that out later on this afternoon if it warms up. But yeah, things are going pretty good out here. The observatory is not finished yet. There's still flooring and desk and a few other little things to go, but we ran up some temporary power, and it's starting to get to the point. So Mike came out last night, Shane, and we were able to get some first light in it.
That's awesome. I did a little backyard observing last night. We had friends over for supper and a couple glasses of wine, so I didn't think driving was the right thing to do.
No, that's the way it goes, of course. And what did you take a look at?
Just a couple carbon stars, one in Ursa Major and then another one in Taurus. I'm adding carbon stars to the backyard repertoire just because you can. Light pollution doesn't really impact that. And, it's interesting to observe the different vibrance of the reds or shades of the reds, as these carbon stars appear. So that was kind of neat. And then looked at Jupiter and Uranus with my little 63 millimeter refractor. I did take a look at Neptune, but in that little refractor, Neptune really isn't that fun. So, but the others were great. It was a pretty short session for me, maybe 45 minutes, and then I packed it in. So, but let's hear about the initial observatory session.
Oh man, it was pretty cool because I put the scopes up. I think I sent you the shot of the scopes up, and then we had to put the temporary we have temporary power run, and it's pretty big. The mount I've got in the observatory is an AZEQ6, and it has some high power consumption requirements from what I've read. And so I'd gone over the specs with my builder, and he knows a little bit more about this stuff than I do. He's really good. And I bought a power cable to run up there as temporary power, and he said, we're not putting that power cable up there. That's just going to be problems. So he's somebody who in the past has worked as a professional framer, now like runs his own sort of personal company. And so he brought in one of his cables that they would like run from, I think, like basically some sort of like outlet somewhere, like when you're building a house, into the house, like to actually build the house. And it has a lot of power carrying capacity and whatever you need for that kind of stuff, which I don't know that much about. And so he ran that up last weekend, and then we sort of messed around with it a bit to patch the telescope in a way that we can sort of run things, when I'm out here and we put stuff in. But it's kind of still a matter of putting stuff in and then taking it out because he's still doing some work there. So he did that, and I had the telescope set up, and then we rolled the roof off, and it was just this beautiful, like, I can't believe how nice yesterday was as far as a December day here in Saskatchewan. Usually, Shane, we're looking, I think this time last year, we were lucky if we were cracking temperatures warmer than -20, and yesterday was +2 degrees Celsius out here.
Yeah, that's really good. Have to take advantage of these temperatures because it can always be much colder this time of the year in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, so it was neat. I had the telescopes up, and then we got the power working, and I was a little bit concerned maybe the power on the mount wouldn't run because it'd been sort of around in the cold for a number of weeks now, like 2 weeks. And as well, like I really hadn't powered it up yet. Like, when I actually bought it from one of our listeners, Ian, and we had turned it on, of course, and run it through its paces and that. So I knew it worked then, but it had sort of been sitting around for a number of months and then a number of weeks here in the cold. So that was always a bit of a question mark in my mind. So I was really happy when that little red light came on. And and then we just kind of just sort of stood there looking at it, took that photo. But my builder and I just kind of hung out in the observatory for about an hour, like going, wow, like this is really going to work, like sort of surprisingly enough. In a way, like I'm not too surprised. He's a fantastic builder, and the way it rolls off is, well, a lot of people have asked me what kind of motor or hand crank or what, like, how do you roll it off? And it's like, no, you just need to use like 4 fingers on one hand, and it rolls pretty smooth. It hadn't rolled as smooth for a while, and then he did some modifications to it and has it rolling quite easily now. And so you just undo a few turnbuckles, and it just rolls off. It takes about 2.5 minutes to get it rolled back, and then to the same amount of time to roll it back in place. It takes very, very little time, but it's a 8x10 shed. He did the building on it. We had a long list of things that I wanted to make sure worked pretty good before we put any telescopes in there. So one of the things I learned from you and I, Shane, talked a fair bit about observatories, because you had one, and I had noted down all the shortcomings that you had run into. So I did learn a lot from you, and appreciate because you had one of those pods for a number of years, eh?
I did, yeah, quite a few years. I can't remember exactly how long, and I used it fairly extensively, probably the first 2 or 3 years that I owned it, and then my usage slowly dwindled for a number of reasons. Primarily just having a fixed location in my backyard for a telescope kind of limited what I could observe, because for anybody that has observed in a backyard, like in an urban setting, there's usually a whole bunch of obstacles that are in your way, whether it's other buildings or trees or whatever. And the way you overcome that is by moving the telescope around.
Yep.
And, an observatory sort of defeats that, right? And, as such, I found I was actually starting to observe more outside of my observatory than inside of it. And like I say, the usage dropped out and I sold it. But, having like my lesson learned for myself is an observatory is a great thing, but it needs the right location. And my backyard was not the right location.
So I spent a long time sweating over this, as you know, and because we have, like, our land isn't huge. We have 2 lots. There's a cabin on one of the lots, and then there's a vacant lot, which I bought for this hill. The hill is really great to observe from, but I did kind of play around with the idea of putting it like closer to the cabin, simply for convenience sake, especially in really cold weather or if there's a lot of snow. But in the end, I followed your advice, and I talked to some neighbors, because my concern was if the snow drifts a certain way, I actually can't get to the hilltop from my cabin. And so, that could be a problem. So, but if it does drift that way, the hill blows clear. So there's no snow up there, but there's just snow between here and there, which is about, I don't know, 50 or 75 feet or something. And I talked to my neighbors, and they said, yeah, it's no problem. You can just come through our yard when the conditions are like that. They're more than happy, right? And so with that, I kind of really settled on putting it up on the hill, to follow your advice, which is go for that all sky view. And then working with my builder, we very carefully designed the wall height to be such that the wall height essentially matches the contours of my landscape, more or less. So you get to see about 95% of the visible sky. And the part that you can't see, of course, is just right on the horizon. But even insofar as how the roof rolls back, it lines up with the tree line to my north, which rises up a little bit. And so I don't really lose any usable sky. You can't see, like last night, the Big Dipper was sort of coming up through the trees to the north. You'd never point a telescope through there, and you can't see, it when it's sort of behind these trees, but you'd never be pointing a telescope there anyway. So we worked hard to match that. And then even if you take a look at that photo I sent you, you can kind of see just barely a hair of the hill that's behind me. And then you can see a couple of the tops of the trees that are nearby. So I do lose just maybe 1 degree all the way around from what the true horizon is. And then there's a bright dome from the city, and of course made it slightly higher in that direction because we needed support in that corner. But yeah, so we kind of settled on that. The other thing that I learned from you, Shane, was you had a lot of like heat and humidity challenges, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, it would get pretty warm during the daytime in there, and then almost every night it would hit like 100% humidity. And I had a wireless temperature and humidity gauge inside of the observatory, so I could monitor it. And it shocked me how much humidity was in there all of the time. And then, yeah, in the summertime, like it was a gray skypod shed, but it would easily get 40, 45 degrees in there. It seemed to stabilize at that point. Like it didn't really matter how hot the day was. I shouldn't say that. It didn't matter how high the maximum temperature would get. But on the hottest of days, it would be 40 degrees, maybe 45. But even on like a kind of medium ranged hot day, it would still be 40 degrees in that thing. So it got pretty warm.
Yeah. So, and with that in mind, I'd watched this video. It's a great video. You can Google it, by Richard Berry. And he's a longtime telescope maker and amateur astronomer, all kinds of different backgrounds in astronomy. And he did this video during the pandemic. I think it was for the AAVSO. And he talked about handling the heat and humidity by raising the floor up and making sure you had all this extra ventilation. Like when you build like a wooden structure, that's something you can do. I was going to say that's easy to do. It is not easy to do, trust me. Versus when you get one of these skyshed pods, which are awesome for their convenience and ease of use. For example, how long did it take you to get your pod up and running when you purchased it?
Yeah, like not even 30 minutes probably.
Okay. So we started the observatory on June 20th, and yesterday was the 3rd of December. So, or 2nd of December, sorry. Yeah, so almost 6 months. So there's a little difference in that, and that is definitely one of the shortcomings of trying to work around the often impactful issues that you have when you have an observatory. So what we did is, instead of building it right on flat ground, and after we did this, I realized why, even with those challenges, people might decide to build it on flat ground, because it definitely does increase many of the other challenges with having an observatory. But by building it onto the side of a hill, we created it's probably about close to a 1 meter air gap between the floor and the ground. And it's sort of open on the east, which is the cooler side, as we all know, because the sun sets in the west and you have the afternoon, evening heating. So once you get into the afternoon and evening, it actually is pretty cool underneath there. The ground tends to hold a lot of the coolness. And as such, it does tend to keep the observatory a fair bit colder. And then the other thing we did towards the end of the warm season is we put in giant house vents in it. Like basically it has house vents like my neighbor's house has, and that house I think is around 1,000 square feet. Well, my observatory isn't even 100 square feet, and we've got about as much ventilation as their entire attic does. So yeah, that makes a big difference. There's some other sort of weird and wacky things that I did. One thing I got from Richard Berry was to use a transparent roof. And this serves a number of purposes and typically raises the most questions when anybody looks at it. I'm still a little bit unsure of it. My builder was extremely unsure and advised strongly against it, and said that he would do it if I wanted. He, by trade, in addition to being a framer, had worked for a time as a professional roofer and knows a lot about roofing, and decided that in order to do this, he would actually bring in one of his colleagues who is also an expert roofer to do the roofing. And they did it, and I think it looks really nice. And inside, what you get is you get about a 50% illumination is what you have on the outside. So if it's pretty bright and sunny outside, you go in there and it's almost like you're wearing a pair of polarized sunglasses inside. it kind of dims the light down a little bit, but basically it's like being outside, but with sunglasses on, you can sort of function and do things around, and you can actually work on stuff. And then we put in some windows and that sort of thing to create some added ventilation when needed. So you can go in and work. It was nice yesterday, beautiful sunny day, and you go up, and because that's one thing I found with a lot of other observatories I've been in is that you open the door and it's, beautiful sunny day, and now it's pitch black inside, and you may not want to open it for whatever reason. Maybe it's windy, or there's a chance of rain, or who knows what. It's just nice to be able to go in and not have to turn lights on. And like I said, we didn't even have the power run to it at that point, so it was nice to be able to go in and do some work in there. And I also have a drop down wall. That was the other thing that he did. What I ended up doing was I bought a book on building amateur observatories. It's a really old book by Richard Berry. I had other books, but during his presentation, he had mentioned this, and I tracked it down. I think I paid like 20 or 25 bucks for it. It's basically like a magazine and has blueprints, and it's from the 80s, but the designs are from like as early as like the 40s or 50s and going up to the 70s, but no later. And we essentially took one of those blueprints and modified it. And what my builder did is he took these books, he went through, he flipped through them all. He didn't like sit and read them. He said, I'm not going to do that. And then he kind of started sketching out what he thought the design should be based on like knowing me and what I had told him about my observing. And one thing I didn't include was a drop-down wall. And when I said nothing about a drop-down wall, he asked about a drop-down wall. And I said that all the people I knew who had them didn't use them as much because they were often they're pretty heavy, Shane. I'm not sure if you've ever used them before, but they can be heavy and awkward to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never really seen one in an observatory before. Well, I shouldn't say that, actually. I think Lucy and Kemble's observatory that the local club here took custodianship of, I think it actually does have a drop down near the entrance, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah. Is that even in use or?
Not really in use. No, it's just out at the site.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of what I've seen with a lot of observatories, or hear from a lot of people who are building observatories, is that the roof ends up being a bit heavy, or like these drop downs end up not in use because they're heavy or whatever. So he came up with a design for like this hybrid drop down. It doesn't drop down like the full width. It drops down about 7.5 feet, but it's only about 8 inches tall. It's not really tall, but he matched it to the height that the telescope would be at, such that I can get down to within about 3 degrees of the true southern horizon. And over on the other side of the valley that I'm on, there are some lights, and then every once in a while you do get a car that turns into a road over there, and it can kind of sweep you with lights. And it was always like, I don't want to catch those lights in the telescope because it's basically going to blind me for like 20 minutes afterwards. And then like there are a few like house lights and the odd street light that's over there too. And so it's designed so that when you're inside, you don't see any of that. All you see is just basically more or less dark sky. Of course, I'm only 40 minutes out of the city, so I do get some light pollution. But yeah, so that drop down works pretty good. The one sort of oddity in the design is, and this is by design that he came up with, is that you have to use the drop down. There's no option not to use the drop down. You have to turn the drop down in order to open the roof. It's part of the seal of the observatory, so that when you get it open to run it, you put the drop down, and then you open the roof. So it kind of forces you to use it. So then you do start looking at things in the southern sky. You don't just end up leaving it up and observing around it. And at first I was like, when he showed it to me, I was like, I don't know about that. But then like last night in use, it was great because we were frigging around with things, and we wanted to look at the Helix Nebula eventually just to test things out, and punched it in and went and took a look at the Helix Nebula simply because that was one of the nearest deep sky objects to where we ended up having the scope pointed. And so that kind of method to his madness, I thought, was pretty brilliant in the end.
Well, that's good that it worked out.
Yeah, it worked out really well, and it rolls. That was the one thing we only did. We only did about 2.5 hours, because we were a little bit concerned if we had trouble getting it rolled back on. That, well, one, I thought, well, it would be fine to leave open. It was a nice, beautiful, clear, cold night. But I thought if I had to call him, if we did have an issue, then he would probably still come up if it was like 9:30 or quarter to 10. But yeah, so we did a few hours or a couple hours, a little more, and then rolled it on. It only took like, again, 2.5, 3 minutes in the dark, never having put it back on in the dark before. And it rolled, strangely enough, it rolled much better in the cold than it did in the heat of the day. So that was another little bit of a surprise, because we hadn't used it at night before and hadn't used it in -7 temperatures before. But somehow the way that he designed it, it actually rolls much, much easier when it's cold, because he set the tracks a certain way. So if you roll it when it's like 40 degrees out, it's actually hard to roll it. Like, it's not hard, but it's harder. It's really a bit of a grunt. But the colder that temperature, like typically like a nighttime temperature of around 7 or 8 degrees, that's when it's designed to roll. It turns out, sort of strangely enough, somehow he's incorporated that. So it's very easy to roll once you get into those cooler nighttime temperatures.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of things like that. So what we did first is had the telescopes up. We had it open. Mike came out. He came in. I had it, beautifully warmed up in here, and we kind of hung out for a bit while I got ready. I'd already been up in the observatory for like hours at that point, so I kind of need to be inside for a short while. And then we moseyed on up and got we did like the 1-star alignment, and then we were cruising around, and we were just having fun playing with I've never really had a go-to telescope that worked very well before, and this one works quite well. And so we were just kind of having fun with the go-to. And something I forgot about, which Ian told me about when I bought it from him, is you do have to be careful with the cord wrapping around it. So of course, after about an hour of this, we got the cord nice and wrapped, and it really pulled pretty hard. And everything is cold, and it pulled the power out. And then because everything was getting so cold at that point, we had trouble getting the power reseated. So we had to go through a lot of these cycles of do star alignments and then use it for a little bit, and then it would knock out within a few minutes. And so we came back down, got warmed up a little bit. We got some tape, and we went back up with some electrical tape, and we just taped down that connector pretty hard. It's just a cigarette lighter connector. I don't know why, but for some reason, that's like the chief way to connect these mounts to power. Doesn't really seem to be too many other good options, but I will be exploring that, because that connection in the cold weather is not reliable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is a terrible way to connect power.
Yeah. I'm sure it works fine. Like, it worked fine at first, but then, when we started, I think it was -4. And, it was dropping at the rate of about 1 degree an hour last night. And so by the time we got to -7, it wouldn't stay. Like, it has like a springiness to it, and the plastic lost that rigidity. And so, yeah, that became a little bit of a problem there. So we had to go through those cycles. It was nice. I talked about perhaps putting one of my other scopes up. I only used the 100 millimeter, but I put the 60 on as a counterweight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did spend some time balancing it out. I wasn't really sure. The thing I wasn't sure about with this mount, which I'm happy to report does actually work pretty good, is how well it would work as a manual mount.
Okay. Are you able to release the clutches, like that kind of manual movement, and just...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the thing that I wasn't sure about is when you release the clutches, it, like, to me anyway, just in playing with it, even in the daylight, it seemed like it was sort of a little bit of all or none. But, once I started using it, I got the knack for it within about an hour or so of, you can actually still leave a little bit of tension on them. And then I actually quite like the way it works. I know some people complain about it or whatever, but for me anyway, just releasing the clutches just a little bit so I can scooch to a different part of the sky and just point it at things manually. Because while having a go-to it was just kind of fun for about an hour. And this is exactly the same thing I found with my AZ GTI, is that after I kind of used it for an hour and had some fun, just kind of, playing around, getting it to point to stuff, that novelty wears off pretty quick for me. And I just kind of like, I know where stuff is. I just want to throw the clutches and point it at whatever it is. Right. So I was able to kind of learn how to get that working, but I was glad I only had the 6 pound Takahashi 100mm on it last night. And at a future point in time, I will put the bigger scope on there. But I think that learning curve was much, much easier with a small, lightweight telescope than it would be with, a really big telescope. So I was glad in the end that we had sort of made that decision, even though we could have put the big scope up.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty cool. So we had a nice view using the GoTo. We just, put it on the Veil, had a nice view of the Veil just for fun. Took a look at M27, took a look at the North American Nebula, which in that telescope, and you're in there, and like when you're in there, you don't see any other lights. It's very dark, and you can be fully dark adapted. And it was Saturday night. It's early. It's only like 7:30. The odd cars driving by, and people are starting to do their Christmas visitations and having Christmas lights on and stuff. There's nothing here very close by. It's all very, very far in the distance. But even that little bit of light always does seem to detract from your dark adaptations. So yeah, we were able to have some nice views of those things, particularly the North American Nebula was pretty nice. And then the last thing we looked at was the Helix before we started getting into this power thing, and then decided that I just wanted to start using it manually after that. And so we took a poke around and looked at the open clusters up in Auriga and the Pleiades, and then we looked at Jupiter for a long time. And then then we started talking about how we would pack it down. So trying to be a little bit careful and cautious, because both Mike and I had long work weeks last week, and we were pretty tired by about 9:00 or so. So we were like, okay, and we've done 2 hours. And like I said, I didn't want to push my luck trying to pack things away like in the middle of the night, and running into a problem or something would have not been an enjoyable experience,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, and that's kind of the beauty of this time of the year too, is we can get the observing in before we get too tired.
Yeah, exactly. But it was so nice. I was so appreciative that Mike came out, because when I did start running into those power issues, I've got a lot riding on this to make sure it works, right? Mm-hmm. And it was really nice to have him there. And he's like, oh no, like we'll sort this out, kind of thing. And let's go down and just get some tape and take a break. And yeah, so we did that. And so that was pretty good. And one of the concerns I did have, my builder and I decided to go with a wooden pier post in the ground. And this tends to be kind of a controversial thing. In fact, even just sending some photos to a few of our listeners, I did have one person write back and go, wow, you're a rebel kind of thing, going with a wooden post. The reason why we did that, though, is that there are already many wooden posts in the ground up there. And Shane, I think one week we were talking about whether or not it would stay level, and we had a listener asking if it would stay level. I don't know if you remember that or not.
No, I don't.
And that person was wondering if I had a way to work around that, which kind of sort of do, but I'm sort of happy to report that so far it has remained completely 100% level. So by using the same method that other people have used to put similar posts into the ground on the same hill, it has remained level, just like those posts have. And yeah, so we knew that going in, if we followed that same procedure, that very likely we would remain level, and it has remained level throughout the warmth of summer. We put it in June 20th, and that's a lot of time. A lot of rain fell, a lot of dryness, a lot of cracks in the earth, and then some snow and some freezing cold weather, and it has remained level. So fingers crossed, it does remain level. There is a little bit of vibration. I was talking with Mark Radici in the summer about that, and that vibration is there. Strangely enough, it's mostly in the center. So if you hit the mount itself, and you do have to kind of give it a good wrap, you can see it vibrate a little bit for about 7 seconds. In focus, though, like when you're focusing, it's about 2.5 seconds of vibration once you let go of the focus. And I mean, that one is really subtle. I'd say it's in the same range as any of my tripods. But having that little bit of vibration on the mount itself, we're gonna in the spring do some work to mitigate that. So that's the plan there. So anyway, it was sort of a good first trial run. It was really fun.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's exciting to hear that you were able to use it. And, I would imagine with any of these builds, there's always going to be additional things to kind of work out or correct. So it's good that you're able to use it and start to identify, maybe some of the little refinements that you can do to, really finish it off and make it the experience you want.
Yeah, he's got the wood he's going to put in a custom little fold down desk and a chart table and that sort of thing, just as he has time. I really appreciate like his time and patience with me in building this. He built it out of almost as much out of interest to build something like this, because it has to be built very exacting, and he is somebody who can do that type of work. My original plan was to hire a company that I know to build me a shed that I would then just have assembled on site on a flat piece of ground. So it wouldn't have been in the right spot. I would have been into the issues with having it right on the ground itself with the humidity and moisture, and perhaps not as ventable. That was my original plan. The cost, I saved up for that, and the cost of that would have been twice what the cost of doing it this way was, even though it probably would have been faster by sort of going this slow and steady pace. It has been an unaffordable experience versus something which I might have actually had to put off a number of further years in order to afford. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to find somebody local who was excited to do this and took like a vested interest in making it very very much the way that I want it and the way that an observatory needs to work. So it's been very lucky for me.
That's
anyway.
Good.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, you've come out and seen it sort of in pre-production. Now you'll have to maybe come out if we can get a good night here in the winter time once we get a few more things done to it. So now that we've had a trial, he's going to come out this afternoon here and we'll go over some of the things and we'll go from there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anything to add to this bit of a monologue from me on my observatory? A little bit.
No, nothing else really.
All right. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks everybody for listening. You can always send us your show ideas, observations, and questions to actualastronomy@gmail.com. And thanks to Mark Radici for getting me off the fence and into my own observatory. He's much to thank and perhaps some to blame for my current state. So appreciate that, Mark.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.